3, 2, 1. Hi, good evening and welcome to this CPD Me webinar. My name is Andrew Ormerod. Apologise for the fancy dress this evening. I've just got caught short, such to speak, and so I normally don't dress up for these evening events, but welcome on board and thank you for joining us for this webinar. QI Must Knows in under 60 minutes. We have got Dr. Aklak and also Mr. Tom, who are going to be talking to you all around QI and Must Knows. So we've got a few webinar facts. We can't see or hear you. So if you are sat there in your dressing gown, or maybe you've just jumped into your gym jams after coming out of the shower, don't worry, because we can't see you and we can't activate your cameras. Equally, we can't hear you. So you don't need to scamper around trying to get yourself onto mute. A couple of options tonight. It's always good if you put in the chat where you are dialing in from tonight. So wherever you are, and maybe tell us what you do for a living, pop into the chat. And if you have any questions for the guys, then please put it into the questions and answer box. And then the gents will go through the Q&A throughout the presentation and we'll read them out at the end. If you are a member of CPD-Me, of course, you will get a copy of a CPD certificate, and that will come tomorrow. Once the girls have got in the office in the morning and made themselves a cup of tea, perhaps had a slice of toast, they'll get your CPD certificates out to you. And of course, a copy of the recording will also be available to everybody. So if you are on call or you're having to shoot off, don't worry, you will get access to this recording tomorrow. And of course, if you are a member of CPD-Me, then the certificates and the evidence, of course, will drop automatically into your CPD portfolio for you to reflect. If you are on social media, always good for you to say good evening. So use hashtag CPD Made Simple. And if you're not following us on Twitter, please do so at CPD-Me. If you're not a member of CPD-Me, why not? I guarantee it will make recording and capturing your learning and development super simple. If you're anything like me, I take part in lots of learning and development, but I just was not very good at recording it and capturing the evidence and a short reflection to support the Healthcare Professions Council had I be chosen with a golden ticket for audit. So CPD-Me, I guarantee, will make recording and capturing your CPD easy. And we of course have a 1 month trial for £1.99, so it's almost like a taster, and if you don't like it, then you can cancel it. And in fact, actually, I think the team even give you £1.99 back if you don't like it after 30 days. So it's worthwhile joining us. You can scan that QR code on screen, or I will post some links in the chat as we go through tonight's presentation. We're also live on YouTube tonight, so if you have to jump off and you can't get back on, you can jump onto our YouTube channel. And of course, some of our previous broadcasts are available on there for you to catch up with. So it's always good to subscribe to us on YouTube. Always like to have a little giveaway. So tonight, if you leave us a review on Trustpilot, the App Store or Google, we've got two £25 Amazon vouchers to give away. So please do leave us a review on Trustpilot, on the App Stores or on Google, and we will draw those 2 people tomorrow. So we'll do them live on Twitter and also on what's that other platform called that escapes me, the new trendy one, Instagram. So I'll become a little Instagram star tomorrow and I will post the 2 winners. If you do promote CPD at work, then please do download our CPD poster. It's got all our latest webinars on there, and you can share that at work, and that will allow you to share some of our up-and-coming webinars and also support the ability for people to capture and record their CPD. So you can either scan that QR code or just search CPD-Me poster, and you can download that free. And I think you get a copy of it and emailed to you every month, so you can share that with your work colleagues. And of course, if you have got our mobile app, it will make capturing CPD simple, and it also makes registering for these webinars even easier, because you can just click one button and it will register you. And equally, tomorrow when your certificate gets sent, it will also pop up like it shows on screen there and remind you to record your CPD. So you can click that screen and then it goes through to a very short reflection where you can talk about what you've learned, how that's going to influence the change of practice, and how that is going to benefit and translate to better patient care. So that's 4 minutes of me chatting away. I'm going to hand over now to these 2 gentlemen. So I'm going to hand you over to Dr. Aklak Choudhury and Mr. Tom Rollinson. Are you there, gentlemen?
We are indeed.
Fabulous. Yeah. I'm going to hand the screen all over to you.
Lovely stuff. Aklak, I'll do the intro here and then I'll pass over to you if that's fine. So nice to meet you also. a bit surreal not being able to see people's faces, but yeah, lovely to meet you. So as we've talked about there, so what we'll be talking about today is demystifying what quality improvement is a little bit more, explaining the key concepts and the kind of hidden pitfalls that we've experienced over our time in the NHS, but also doing quality improvement and what you might experience during your journey as well. It's giving you a bit of a framework to take away, all before bedtime, before 9 o'clock, hopefully. So this will be a precursor to a more comprehensive symposium, which will be taking place later on the year in November, which will be looking at the quality improvement tools, techniques, and tactics in a little bit more if you are interested in finding out a little bit more. So just in terms of introductions to myself and my colleagues, so I'm Tom Rollinson. So I worked in the NHS for about 8 years or so previously worked in East Midlands Ambulance Service as the reducing avoidable conveyance lead. So smack bang during COVID, which was loads of fun, but we managed to do some amazing work there, and we'll be presenting at the College of Paramedics in a couple of weeks' time on some of the stuff that we did. Worked in University Hospitals Derby and Burton prior to that as well. Currently working at KPMG in healthcare consultancy now. So yes, over to you, Aklak.
Hi, so I'm Aklak Choudhury. I'm a respiratory physician. I've been working in the NHS for 27 years, so it's a really long time, and I don't know where the time's gone. Well, why do I get involved with quality improvement? Well, it's been there pretty much when I first started. We used to call it change management, and then somehow it morphed into this improvement idea and then quality improvement. But at the moment, I'm a clinical director for quality improvement. I support mentorship for clinicians throughout UHDB at Derby and Burton, and I also support development to the point of publication with BMJ Open Quality as associate editor. And as you well know, Tom, we do lots of workshops together as well. So hopefully that's enough introductions, and you'll get to know a bit more about us as we go along. So to the next slide. So over to you, Tom.
Yeah, thank you very much. And just a shout out to Adam Bayard as well from the Derbyshire Alternative Pathway Ambassadors. Glad that's living on. So just a bit of signposting. So as Aklak mentioned there, we do this as a bit of a startup, so we do a little bit of training around quality improvement. So there is additional content online should you wish to visit on quipstart.com. We do have a social media platforms on YouTube and Twitter, so we're developing these online videos which will hopefully support your understanding and education related to quality improvement. And like I mentioned before, we've got an upcoming webinar in November, so that'll be aimed at kind of newcomers and beginners to quality improvement, but we'll signpost a little bit more towards the end. So just next slide. And kind of content today, so we've done our welcome and intros, just a bit of housekeeping in the next little bit, and then we'll have the idea of the meat of the session will be 10 tips to succeed with quality improvement, with one bonus tip as well, and then a little bit of time for quality with question and answer at the end, and then final signposting. So just moving on to the next slide. Just in terms of, weren't quite expecting it to be in the format that we're in today, but we don't need to ask you to go on mute. If you obviously can't raise your virtual hand, we can't pick you for exercises, so that's fine. But we will be using menti.com, so we'll just be gathering some insights just in terms of who's here today and kind of what you do as well, what you think about quality improvement. So we'll have a forms at the end just in terms of getting some feedback from you guys. But yes, that's what will be. That's the kind of housekeeping for today. And then moving on to the next one. So just a warning up front. So this is really just a taster and an introduction to quality improvement today. So from our perspective, it's really just, as we're going to talk on, it's a really a lifelong journey of learning about quality improvement and becoming an improver. This is just the real tip of the iceberg. And the purpose of this session is to share some of our lessons so far. This should be supplemented with some more formal training, but also support from your colleagues and your trusts as well. So just a brief warning. At the end of this session, don't feel like you're kind of the expert, and go and change lots of stuff. It's a case of actually this should hopefully appetize you to want to get involved a little bit more. So just in terms, we want to get a brief view of who's in the room today. So Aklak's just going to pop up a Mentimeter. I have popped in a website onto the chat, which is www.menti.com, and there will be a code as well that we'll need to pop in there, which will be 14794963. So I'll pop that into the chat as well.
So I hope can you see the Menti screen? Am I sharing that now?
I can see that. Yeah, that's fine.
And what we'd like to do, if you can just go onto your phones, or if you're on a PC, just go into your browser, www.menti.com, 14794963 is the entry code. And just tell us who you are, not in huge detail, but, whether you're a paramedic, so working in a hospital, managerial, and what kind of role you have. So and it should hopefully come up as a word cloud. So this is new technology for Zoom. We've not tried this on Zoom before, so hopefully it would work okay. Give you a few seconds to do that. Okay, right, so we've got some managers, physiotherapists, and the team. Okay. Hi, Josie.
Hi, Chelsea paramedic. We've got quite a few paramedics on today, haven't we? It's good to
give it a few more seconds. Okay, surgical first assistance. Okay, so we're getting a few different types. ECA, yeah.
We've got quite a broad range of people on today, actually. It's good. It's quite strange not being able to see people as well. I suppose we've got people in the chat, haven't we? But yeah, it's great to get a good idea of actually who's on the line.
So we'll give it 1 or 2 more seconds. So we've got doctors, obviously occupational therapist, the bigger the word, the more of you are. So manager and occupational therapist has got a few more. But yeah, quite a broad group, really. Okay, great. All right, just carry on doing that in the background. I'm going to go back to the previous screen. And let me just share that back again. Hopefully this is all going to work.
Some whizzy tech stuff you're doing here, Aklak, but I believe I'll introduce the first tip just whilst you're pulling that back up. So the first tip which we'll be looking at is, it sounds really basic, but have an understanding of what quality in healthcare means. And so Aklak's going to go into that, being an expert in this particular field.
Yeah, so first thing, of course, is none of us are experts, because it's improvement is a lifelong journey, Tom, and we're going to make that journey until we die, to be honest. And I'm always learning something new. And I think the word experts is something that perhaps doesn't ever apply to quality improvement, because I think it's just something that there's always something new that we don't know. So before we really start talking about quality improvement, it's really, you have to go back to essentially what we think quality is. And there are lots of very complicated definitions of quality, and you can go across the pond in the UK or elsewhere, and you will have a very long sort of drifting paragraphs of text to define it. But I think, to try and keep things as simple as possible, the Institute of Medicine have come up with these 6 domains, which they've put the acronym STEEP up for. And it's sometimes quite helpful just to think of it and just break it down into the context of what it means for healthcare. So this is a healthcare definition rather than perhaps what you may find in industry, or such as the car industry or elsewhere. So what does STEEP actually stand for? Well, I think obviously it stands for safety. That's what we're, in terms of, in the clinical environment, in the health environment, ultimately we need to deliver safe healthcare. And I think that's really quite important. So these could represent things such as a WHO checklist, if you're doing an operational procedure, to make sure that you are bringing in the patient with all their protocols and all their medications with them from home to hospital, etc. So it's just a case of just making sure that that is ticked off. The next thing is timely. So timely is quite another broad one, but you could just break it down into sort of reducing waits and reducing harmful delays. So that could be, for example, time to be seen in the emergency department of 4 hours, or a 2-week cancer waiting, or an 18-week clinic wait, etc. And that's important, because if you don't hit those kind of targets and somebody's got an operation for, let's say, a hip, etc., and it takes twice as long, then obviously you're causing morbidity and harm to that patient. So timely care is relevant, but we shouldn't just be fixed on the KPIs, if you like, the key performance indicators. Then it's got to be effective as well. So we're going into the E's now. What does that actually mean? Well, it means that you're delivering care that is supported by scientific knowledge. Okay, so this may be a Cochrane database. This could be a NICE guidance. Are you delivering the care that is up to date and is relevant to the patient group that you're looking after? And that sometimes is sometimes missed. And, if you don't enact on a NICE guidance in time, you may not deliver the right care in an effective manner. Sometimes there's a lot of focus on this one, isn't there? So efficiency, adding value is the positive word, and sometimes we say avoiding waste. So making sure that we're using not just time resources, but also of equipment, supplies, ideas and human resources as well. So are we doing this as efficiently as possible? If someone comes into clinic and they're waiting half an hour, what are they actually doing for those 30 minutes? And do we need to change the way we work to make that happen? Next, we've got equitable. I think out of all of the 6 domains, this is probably the hardest one to pull off. It's essentially is to making sure that you deliver the same quality of patient care, devoid of what personal characteristics you have. So gender, ethnicity, location, socioeconomic status. Oh, well, yeah, that sounds good, but what does that actually mean? It means that if you've got a 65-year-old gentleman who, let's say, goes into Queen's Burton Hospital at 2 a.m. on a Sunday where there's no consultant and 1 trainee junior and 2 senior nurses around, they get the same septic 6 bundle as a 22-year-old Caucasian girl who comes at Royal Derby Hospital on a Monday morning where there's 12 consultants and 15 trainees around. They get the same care. Just imagine how difficult that is to pull off. Okay, and if we can do that and everyone gets equitable care, then we're on to a winner. And that's probably why it's the most difficult. And finally, being patient-centered. So that's what we're all about. The P really should be first in that acronym, but it just doesn't make a sensible word. But we're all here for patients. And that doesn't just mean that, yep, we're here for patients. It also means that if we're doing improvement work, we need to engage with our patients to find out truly what the problems are. And it's got to be responsive to the individual patients' responses and references. So essentially, if we don't ask our patients what they want and we think we know what the answers are, then we probably haven't got around it in the right way. So let's move on to that. So that was tip number 1. It's actually quite difficult to get 10 tips. There's about 30, which we sort of had to really think about these. So these are not, you won't find them in any book. This is just from experience and just from us seeing and, reviewing patients, talking to lots and lots of people, and not just the obvious things, but some of them are less obvious as well. So the next one, have a good definition of what quality improvement is. Well, we talked a bit about quality and we talked about STEEP. So the next step is, well, what does quality improvement actually mean? I'm going to get you back onto Menti in a second. So I want you to have a look at those 5 statements. In your mind, what do you think quality improvement is? Now, you may have more than one that you think, yeah, I agree with that statement, but which one do you shall we say, gets you most passionate about? Which of those 5? You had to really pick one out of the 5. Which one would you go for? So I'm just going to switch it. I'll have a quick read of those. They're going to be shared also on this screen, and try and find that again. Share. Hopefully you can see that screen. We've got a few more things coming through here. So I've got DAS paramedic, clinical lead urgent care. So I'm just going to go to the next slide. And hopefully you can see this one now. So this is the new question. The code should be the same. So www.menti.com and use the code 14794963. So you've got involve patients that are closest to the issues, give staff the time, permission, resources, and skills, a systematic and coordinated approach, solve problems using specific methods and tools, and finally, to bring measurable improvement. So give you a few more seconds to see what you think. Okay, so a couple in the lead. It's like horse racing, this, isn't it? As who's going to get to the finishing post first. So as you continue entering in there, I think we've got a couple of clear ones here: systemic and coordinated approach, and to bring measurable improvement. So what I will say to you is that if we then go back to our slides, and if we have a look at that definition, okay, and I'll read it out slowly. Quality improvement is about giving the people closest to issues, affecting the care quality, the time, permission, skills, and resources they need to solve them. It involves a systematic and coordinated approach to solving a problem using specific methods and tools with the aim of bringing about measurable improvement. Basically, all 5 of those statements are in there. Okay, and this is the Health Foundation definition that only came out last year. And I think it's a pretty good one, and it's pretty inclusive of all the elements there. But what I really want to emphasize to you is that this is not a technical game, quality improvement. It requires people. It requires people that are closest to the problems that they're trying to solve. So this is not a high-level managerial task. These are essentially the people on the shop floor who are seeing the problems day in, day out, who are closer to the problems. And it's not just about allowing them to do the improvement, giving the permission, but also to educate and train. And this is partly what we're doing here as well. So if you want to look at that definition, you'll find it in the Health Foundation Guide to Quality Improvement. Okay, so simple guide to quality improvement. QI tip 3. So know the difference between QI and audit. Okay, so interesting. So 90s, yeah, the noughties, and probably in 2010, it was all audit, wasn't it? Everything was audit, you know, let's benchmark, etc. And then suddenly improvement came along, and particularly quality improvement, and suddenly audit not necessarily got a bad name, but it sort of got put onto the back burner. And just going to just show you this in terms of what we think they are. Very, very broad definitions these are. And we're not going to go into the detail of audit, but audit essentially is data for accountability. So you're benchmarking against a national standard, a local previously defined standard, or even a regional or specialty standard, to say, right, this is what it's like. How close are we to that standard? It can do a cycle, so you could put in an implementation and then re-audit, and then that's kind of that cycle completed. Improvement, essentially, especially when it comes to the data, you're collecting data to show the improvement, and you're looking at potentially doing change ideas. And it's an industry in itself. So there's more than one way to do improvement work, and there's more than one methodology that you can apply. And to be honest, we're not signing up to any of these methodologies particularly. It's just more of a case of what works and what is particular there. And we're going to talk a bit about methodology a bit later on. So if we just look at this, it's a very simple picture of what you might describe as an audit. Okay, you've got some data with your outcome on your y-axis and time on the x-axis. You've got 2 points of data collection. You may have collected a lot of information, and then you had some predefined intervention that you may have already decided what to do. And then suddenly it's gone up. And that's it. You've done your audit cycle. Pre-data, intervention, post-data, cycle complete. It's gone up the right way. All looks hunky-dory, that's it, it's all done, benchmarked. But actually it's a bit more complicated than that, because if you remember, we talked about all sorts of parameters for quality, be it safety, timely, equitable, efficient, effective, or patient-centered. So just measuring one outcome is not good. The other thing, unfortunately, audit doesn't do, it doesn't tell you about variation. So even though you've done that one intervention and you benchmarked and you've shown that improvement, you haven't necessarily shown that you've sustained that improvement, and you haven't shown the natural variation of a process. And I think when it comes to quality improvement, one of the things that we say about measurement is that you need to continually measure, and you need to show the story of your measurement to know that you are supposed to be where you want to get to. So there's no point just doing 1 or 2 measurements and say job done and move on. And the whole concept of improvement is that the data should be collected over time, because that will tell you a story. So I'm going to move over to Tom. I think, Tom, you're doing QI tip 4.
I'm indeed. So just to read it out more than anything, but be careful when you're picking what to improve, and that might sound like a really strange thing, but I think from my perspective, some of the stuff that we've experienced in the past is that especially in hospitals, but out of hospitals as well, is that people just pick QI projects in the last couple of weeks of their rotation and treat it as a bit of a tick box exercise. And although you will be required to do this as part of your certain training criteria, that you've done a quality improvement project, it doesn't really help anybody, let alone the patients that you are trying to improve care for. So actually being really clear about what could you improve and what other stuff is happening around you. Every organization, no matter how big or small, will have no short of things that need to be improved. So my advice is that you speak to your supervisors, you speak to managers, and discuss area of focus to start at the start of your post as well, rather than right at the end. So what we often find is the last 3 weeks someone's trying to find an improvement which can be done. But I think largely like linking into people within your direct area or even more senior manager position can help to identify an improvement which will have a meaningful impact from a patient care perspective, but also in terms of driving things forward. just missed a slide off there, Aklak. I think I was the buses. So I think from our perspective, what we've experienced before is that it shouldn't just be by yourself just to try and identify a quality improvement project that you want or something you want to improve. It should be really, especially from a rotation perspective or, other big programs of work which are happening, really relies on the organization to be advanced when we look at quality improvement, but you should be supporting the improvements. You shouldn't necessarily be leading them, especially if you're like right at the front line. I think that, as I mentioned, and organizations will have a number of things which are going on from a program perspective. And I think if you're interested in quality improvement, it's identifying what these are, which will support a far more sustainable way of driving improvement. And I think largely as well, Aklak's already alluded to it, quality improvement is about teams, working as a team. And the idea is that you will have people who you can draw on their expertise and will support resilience as well. Because I'll tell you what, this is going to be hard. If you haven't done it before or you're going through it now, you will have experienced as well. This is something which, you'll have really bad days. People do not like change. And I think, it's really useful if you're part of a program to draw on people and their experience to kind of move things forward. It may sound on the flip side, you may want to take charge and take the lead. You might not want other people to take credit, but trust me, this is what quality improvement is about. It's about working better together as teams. You're supporting that group thinking and working together to drive improvements in certain elements of the process that you're looking at. So, as you mentioned before, it's if you can join a quality improvement program, that is far better than any other thing that you could try and improve by yourself. And I think. One of the things I've really learned from doing quality improvement is that if you join a good quality improvement program, it's better than any leadership or emotional intelligence program that you can ever join, because you'll be working with people. You'll have a much better self-awareness, and you'll be actually leading improvement from that perspective and driving it. And you can take that as a case study and use that for criteria. So yes, the next one really was. What QI projects should we focus on? And I think one of the things that we're really keen about is actually focusing on the low-hanging fruit. If you just press enter one more time, Aklak. So the diagram we have here is kind of difficulty along the x-axis, and capital being kind of the impact on the y-axis. But actually, don't try and solve the world with your first quality improvement project. You don't need to. Try and make those tangible changes and learn how to do quality improvement. It's all about kind of learning what works for you and your team. So actually, don't try and implement a new IT system with your first quality improvement program. Make sure that people have breaks on your wards, or make sure that people are having welfare checks if you're in the ambulance service, or the list goes on. It's something that you can have a really tangible impact on, which you really want to focus on to begin with.
Yeah. Thanks, Tom. And I think it's really important that, the stuff on the right with a higher difficulty is that you will need to get other people involved and stakeholders to make that happen. So it's best not to sort of bite off more than you can chew, like you've said. So just got to go to the next slide.
That's fine. And this is one I'm going to hand over to you for, Aklak, because this is your area of expertise. So I thought you'd like this one.
Yeah, that's fine. So this is so let's have a look. So in terms of what does instigate a quality improvement program, quite a bit actually, and I'm just going to show you this. Okay, so on the left-hand side, we have what's known as quality assurance. So there's quite a few dimensions to quality, and you will see these terms being bandied around, and they don't quite mean the same thing. So we've got quality assurance here. This is to let you know that you are essentially where you need to be with your quality, okay? And they could be external, such as CQC visiting you. They could be through audits, local and national. You may get some information from patient safety groups that essentially are keeping data such as falls in your hospital, etc., and patient safety alerts that could be both regional and local. You will collect incidents and never events, etc. And they're all basically assurance. If something goes drastically wrong, you may even do a root cause analysis and so forth. But let's not forget the wider patient aspects as well, including complaints and patient experience, such as friends and family testing, and finally mortality. So they're all components of assurance. They're not quality improvement, but they may tell you that there's a problem that requires improvement. On the other side of the coin, you may already have a steady state of information, such as your 4-hour ED target, etc., or key performance indicators to control your quality over a period of time. And this is, again, not improvement, but actually in a more sort of, shall we say, continuous position where you know you need to collect this data. It may tell you where you are at any given moment in time, and this data is just collected anyway in most occasions. And this could be through dashboards, the KPIs like I mentioned for our ED, 2-week weights, etc. You may want to do some quality control on the data on a daily basis by getting safety huddles together and just reviewing the plans and processes of that day, stop events, doing procedures, and all the ward metrics such as pressure sores, etc., and all the conveyancing metrics that you may have in the ambulance service as well. So that's all great, but quality improvement is about what you're going to do to get to that place, if you like. Okay, so both to get that quality control going and the assurance. You may decide that you've got something to improve with. So there may be some new nice guidance. There may be some cost effectiveness, such as a sequin, the actions of an audit, such as the key actions, and new service developments as well. The reason why this is important, why I'm showing you this, is that very rarely do you need to come up with the idea for a quality improvement. There should be plenty going on that requires your attention already, and you can pick and choose what you like. But try to make sure that it's linked in with your department and also perhaps your organizational requirements and needs. Yes, you may have this fantastic idea of a new concept that you've heard over Twitter, but actually before you start doing that, see what's actually happening already and talk to lots of people about what requires improvement. You'll have your views, but to share that is also really important. So just to keep those terms in mind: quality assurance, quality control, and quality improvement, with some examples of what they could represent. Just a final thing, if you go onto the left and the right-hand side, so the black is reactive, okay? You're going to react to information. The green is proactive, okay? So, the more you go to the right of these in terms of quality improvement, you're making an active decision to improve rather than just be reactive. So you're not waiting for the bad event to happen before you take action. So QI tip 5, back to you, Tom.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things probably related to what we spoke about then in terms of joining a QI program is actually finding a QI mentor. And might be difficult to find a QI mentor per se, but finding somebody who's done this before, who's been through an improvement, who can support you through this and give you a bit of a guide. So just next slide, Aklak. If you just there's a few more taps to get all these things up, and I think from my perspective, what we're talking about is I think some of the time, I suppose, over the last 8 years or so in Aklak, 20 odd years in the NHS, I suppose there's not always been people who have had knowledge of QI, but QI is a lot more well known now, and there will be people who were, even if they've not badged it as quality improvement, will have gone through some sort of improvement exercise. So the idea is that they can really offer you an understanding of what the process is from a practical perspective. I think sometimes, quality improvement, people may have attended sessions like this and heard about a process map, and they may intend to have the best intentions, but actually you want those people with lived experience of doing this, and they can help you to avoid those common pitfalls and talk about what has happened before, potentially your knowledge of potential improvement. So, one of the things that which will also help out, I've mentioned about resilience before, but I think, these people will support you when you need to cry, you need to scream, you need to celebrate the times, you need to scream for success. But actually, just don't be a QI loner, as we lovingly called it before. This is really a team sport, and if you can have someone to guide you through this, all the better for those successes, but also those lows as well. Some of those people may be mentors on the line today, and I think one of the things what we'd urge you to say and all about, developing your emotional intelligence is kind of reflect on some of these points as well. So, do you know how good you are? What is your knowledge? Where does it span? Is it in a certain area? Is it something you could develop further? And I think the idea is that over time you can support plugging those gaps in terms of having that fundamental quality of a good leader, in terms of having that self-awareness of what you do. I think one of the things that I hope we're quite good at is that, if you don't know, say you don't know. People are pretty good at telling whether it's bullshit or not. So I think from our perspective, people really respect you if you don't know what a process map is or how you go about doing that. But actually, if someone can have that type of support, you can hold their hand when you go through these type of processes. I think that's fundamental good qualities of a leader from that perspective. Next slide.
Yeah, just sort of the thing about the sponsor and the mentor there. So with the sponsor, this is somebody that may be your departmental lead and so forth, who is essentially supporting your project, and they will know all about the specialty area. They may be a cardiology consultant. They may be someone senior in the paramedic service. but they may not necessarily know much about improvement methodology. Your mentor comes in to support you for the improvement. Now, sometimes you're lucky and you'll have the sponsor and the mentor in the same person, but don't feel that they are necessarily all going to be all in the same place. Okay, so they're slightly looking at different things.
Thank you very much. We're running a little bit behind, Aklak, so I'm going to skip through these quite quickly. So if you could skip on to the next one, that would be really helpful. So I mentioned at the start about an approach which you can use, and this is just one that we sort of developed ourselves. You know, it's by no means the only one which is out there. It's just the ones that we use really. But having a really clear understanding of the phases of the project you're going through. Otherwise, it's just this mass of things which are happening in actions. You know, what we refer to is, we call it our UDIS, and we've got a couple of videos on YouTube which go through a little bit more. But being really clear about identifying what improvement you want to focus on. So what is that problem? Can you link into something which is already happening? Spend time understanding what the problem is. So often we can jump into the deliver stage where we just want to start making changes, whereas actually we don't know what the root cause of the problem is. So spend time understanding what your problem is and where you could focus your efforts. Designing your so-called quality improvement project. So be really clear about your aim and what changes you can make as well, starting to deliver, making changes to that particular process over time, and capturing data to see how that's progressing in the right direction, and then sustaining that change as well. These will be covered in a little bit more detail as we go along, but actually having a really clear phase process of what that looks like. There is more detail underneath that. Not going to look into it now because we are running slightly out of time, but we'll cover this in a lot more detail in the future session. I think one thing just to draw your eyes to is the bottom, the kind of beige coloured bars as well, which is that, attending a quality improvement workshop is really good to have an understanding of those tools, but actually really important working with your mentor is formulating your team, having regular mentors. We do college, mentor, or sponsor, as that might be, and then also collecting data from a 30, 60, 90 day perspective just to see how things are progressing over time. But doing this collectively as a team are really important touch points throughout your project. Next one. I think that's me as well. So a couple of the quick tips before sort of around a similar topic, but if there's one thing you take away from today, it's quality improvement is a team sport. You cannot do it by yourself, and you shouldn't do it by yourself. So just moving on to the next slide and a few bits, but one person you might know here is obviously Lewis Hamilton. He might seem like a one-man band, but from that perspective, he has a whole team of people who are working with him, and those, he might be taking all the glory, but actually some of those people in the team might even be more proud than he is about the accomplishments of the team. So from that perspective, it's thinking about, there may be a particular person who leads the project, but actually you can form part of that QI program and have your vital parts on how you improve those things, because that guy on his own is not going to win that many world championships. It's kind of that collective effort, and can really translate this across into teams and hospitals from that perspective. So I think one of the things that I suppose you have to swallow your pride to a certain extent is that when you're first trying out quality improvement, it might be part of a program, and over time you can develop those leadership skills and knowledge of QI. But actually, forming that team supports that resilience, supports that understanding and development of quality improvement and wider understanding of the healthcare system as well. Moving on to the next slide. So just one more click. So from our perspective, it's an image that we use a lot of the time is that you will have a specific experience and expertise in a particular area, which you might be one of the gentlemen who we refer to as the blind man touching the elephant. And from each of those directions, these people are not talking to each other, and they will see the elephant as different things. So the man dressed in green will think that the elephant is a snake, or the guy touching the ear might think it's a fan, but actually collectively, if they came together, they'd have an understanding thinking that it's actually an elephant rather than anything else. And this is what we see from a different perspective, even looking at a process or across organizations as well. You can't quite see the detail in there, but it's talking about, what's the problem with reducing avoidable conveyances. And what often found, and I'm sure Andy has found as well, and other people on this, is that we often blame each other. So ambulance services blame 111 and we blame GP. GP blames community care. Acute services blames everybody else. Not to blame acute care, but I think from our perspective, if we're trying to improve this, we need to engage all those people who see that process, and the only person and group who actually see the whole process is the patients. So from that perspective, are really key people to be engaged in that. And just one more click, Aklak. back to that self-awareness side of things as well, is that you don't know everything, unfortunately. Hate to burst anyone's bubble, but neither does anybody else. I think that only together we can have a collective understanding of what a process looks like. So don't be Megamind, because he doesn't actually exist. He's a fictional character. So just moving on to the next one. So in terms of understanding your influence as well, so I've talked a lot about self-awareness today, but if you work in a surgical assessment unit and you've had a real problem with GP, you don't have any control of what happens in GP. So what you should do is engage people who might be in primary care, who might support this. There's a whole load of frustration which can happen when you're receiving patients from a particular area, and it's easy to blame them. But actually, if you want to improve things, it's about engaging these people and understanding who has that influence and that control in that particular area. There's no point you trying to improve things that are outside of that. And I think the whole idea is that you can use this as an exercise to think about who you need to engage in your team, thinking about what your control and what your influence is, and also building on who has an interest and potentially can have an impact on the project that you're running as well. Next slide. So I've already spoken about this, and this list isn't exhaustive, but actually think about who has the power, who has high interest in what you're trying to improve, who could you bring get involved in these particular improvements. Patients at the top, as I spoke about, they're the only ones who see the whole process all the way through. So actually thinking about how you can engage those in an appropriate way, as well as other healthcare professionals in any improvement which is happening. So yeah, a real whip through there. I know I've kind of explained that in a really short time frame, but actually it's really fundamental, making sure that you have a really clear understanding of how you link into a team, how you form a really good team in terms of engaging the right stakeholders, and deliver those improvements together. So quick QI tip 7, over to you, Aklak.
So over to 7, so we're past halfway, and I think before we start getting into the crux of trying to do, you've got to spend a bit of time trying to understand the problem before you jump in. And I really can't emphasize that enough. If we don't do that, then you're probably going to go down the wrong path. And eventually you come to think, oh, right, we didn't quite understand what we were trying to do in the first place. And then you come back to this. So this is after you've identified a problem that could be from an audit or whatever you found, you said, right, we've got a problem. You need to spend some time at stage 2, which is to understand. And then you get to the point of designing some potential solution, and then you go through the delivery stage, which we're going to talk about through what we're going to call plan, do, study, act. And then hopefully you're going to get to a place where you've sustained that improvement over time, and you may come back to it from time to time just to make sure that you are where you think you are. But understanding is important. There are a number of different things that you can do to understand the problem, and there are a number of tools out there that allows you to do that. So the basic message here is start with your understanding, don't start with your delivery. And the couple of things that I think are very, very helpful and we use more often than not in terms of tools is a nice process map of your process. So this is something about making a cup of tea, and even making a cup of tea is a bit complex. So if you imagine doing your sepsis 6 pathway from home all the way to ITU, you can see the arrows and the squares and the diamonds in all sorts of different directions. But it's important because it engages the whole team and it allows people to look at individual steps and see whether there's potential scope for improvements for each of those steps. Now, it's beyond the scope of today to go through a process map tool, but we will go through practical exercises in the full workshop later on this year. Likewise, if you want to know what the actual problems are, you can use something called a fishbone, which essentially the head of the fishbone is exactly what the problem is. In this case, it's medical discharges. And then you can decide in terms of the different spine elements, what you want to collect information and what you think these issues are. So for example, causes of medical discharge before midday, it may be related to not enough pharmacists on the ward. There could be something to do with the equipment, not enough computers, the environment, there's no clocks around, etc. The methods, the consultant is not seeing the discharges earlier on their ward round. So there's a load of things that you can pick up from this, and it's a great team building exercise, usually done with post-its, and again we will describe that more at the main workshop. And here's a few things that we've got here as examples, as we just described. Now, QI tip 8. Tom, it's back to you again.
Lovely. I'm popular tonight. So this is one of my there's a fellow in the bottom left hand corner who's kind of the godfather of quality improvement, W. Edward Deming, and one of my favorite quotes from him is that without data you're just another person with an opinion. Might be controversial saying that, but really if you don't measure what you're trying to improve, you cannot say whether you've improved or not. So I'll go into that a little bit more. One of the other things which I've kind of added on to there is that setting your line in the sand. So, one of the things I try to convey sometimes that if you don't set an aim for when you're trying to improve things, you just become a hamster in a wheel. So you can collect the data, but actually, when have you finished? So being really clear about, what your smart aim is, as we like to refer to, but collecting that data. Again, we'll go into more detail in our future session. But in terms of on the next slide, one of the I suppose most common models which you can use in the model for improvement. So 3 questions, which is what are we trying to achieve, which is the aim, how will we know that a change in improvement, which is ultimately the measure, and then what change can we make which will result in improvement. So that's the interventions we're going to change, and then followed by a series of plan, do, study, out cycles, which is that experimentation. So just moving on to the next slide, just drilling down into a little bit more into the measurement side of things, is that we tend to break our measures down into three areas. So one being the outcome measure. So outcome being ultimately what you're trying to achieve with your particular project. Process measure being not necessarily the outcome that you're trying to achieve, but will show you whether you're moving in the right direction or not. Usually related to those things that you're implementing. So it might be checklist completion. It might be, staff being there on time. And the final thing being balancing measure. So actually, is there any unanticipated consequences of the things that you're doing? And we've got an example here, which is using the sepsis 6 bundle. So actually, we're trying to make sure that as a result of time to antibiotics as a process measure here, which we're collecting, that's not necessarily the thing that we're trying to achieve. What we're trying to achieve is the kind of reduction in sepsis, but actually as a result of more antibiotics being given, you might increase the C. diff rate. So really small example, but the thing which is driving you in the right direction all the time is that that aim that you set up front is that the sepsis 6 bundle is completed 1 hour for 90% of the ED patients who've attended that particular hospital. It will vary depending on what you're trying to improve, but actually being really clear about what that aim is and then collecting numerous different types of data to prove whether you're moving in the right direction or not. Not all data is equal, and this is something that is really key that you need to do upfront, is define what data you need to collect. It should be small amounts, as Aklak we talked about, on a regular basis rather than being big lumps of data at the start and at the end.
Because all you're trying to do is show the improvement, aren't you, Tom? You're not trying to write a thesis or a research program of work. It's just the data. So
absolutely.
Going to this slide.
That's it, yeah. And just a simple way of how we tend to show data. So this is what we call a run chart. So it's data over time. So you can talk about any of those measures, what you want to collect. We talked about time to antibiotics. So you might collect that over time. The example we've got here is the percentage of patients with community acquired pneumonia. Is that right? That's right, isn't it? My medical knowledge is getting better. Community acquired pneumonia offered HIV tests. So as you can see over time, we've collected that data. We've added our PDSAs on there as well, those tests that you're trying to move in the right direction. And as you can see over time, you can see an improvement from that perspective. So there's more complicated things you can do in terms of that data and showing the statistics behind that, but ultimately you can write this on a piece of paper if you want to, a 5-bar gate, collecting that data and see how things move in the right direction. So the simplest form, which we'd advocate using, is really using this type of run chart, data over time.
And I think if you get something like this at the end, you've done something worthwhile doing. So that's really right. So QI tip. You need to take PDSA seriously. So you may not have even come across the term PDSA, and essentially it stands for plan, do, study, and act. And what do we mean by taking it seriously? So it's not something that you do as an afterthought. It's really very important as the active process. Got a box of Smarties here, and it's just really trying to illustrate a point, is that if you find that an idea that you've tried hasn't worked, it's not a case of just basically plucking another idea from the air and using that instead. The learning from the first idea, even if it's failed, must lead you to the next idea. So it's not just picking the next Smartie out of the box and going with it. There has to be some rhyme and reason as to why you've decided to go to the next step. And that's usually because there's an active learning component to it. Okay, so just as an example, we're going to go through this. So during a consultant ward round on the 30-bedded respiratory ward, one of our ACPs, as an advanced clinical practitioner, found that the 4-hour-long ward round was stressful and tiring, unsurprisingly, and was wondering whether we could include a break of some sort, or a cup of tea or coffee to refresh the staff. Now, as myself as a consultant was concerned that if we did this, we would not complete the ward round by 1 p.m. and potentially delay management of patients. So to understand the problem better, and this was done live in the middle of the ward round, we collected stress levels amongst members straight after completing the ward round. And we just got a piece of paper and said, right, how stressed are you? At a scale of 1 to 5, stress level 1 is being bliss, and stress level 5 is most stressed ever. So we started to measure just to see where we are at our baseline. And that's what we got. You can see our medical students live in bliss, and our trainee doctors, ACPs, were relatively stressed. I was actually pretty stressed at that time. But we also collected some other information, like the time we finished the ward round, how many patients were seen on that ward round, how familiar we were with those patients on that day, and the length of the coffee break, because we didn't have one, was 0 minutes. We made an aim: reduce the level of self-reported stress by level during a full medical ward round by 50% on the respiratory ward within 2 weeks. So we said what we're going to measure, how much we want to improve by, where we're going to do it, and how quickly. So those 4 elements were really important. Then we did a bit of planning. So we're going to say, right, okay, what are we going to do to make this better? And in this stage, it's actually quite important to have this up front. And so we plan to add a coffee break at 11:30 for a period of 15 minutes, and then use the local coffee machine on the ward. All team members on the ward round will be offered coffee or tea, and one ACP will leave the ward round slightly earlier to get the refreshments to save a bit of time. And we will measure the same as those baseline measurements, and we have to have a prediction because we need to have an estimate of where we want to be. The reason why the prediction is important is because it challenges our learning to say, well, actually, did we get to where we wanted to do in the first place? And we predicted that we're going to finish 30 minutes later because actually it just takes that long to have a coffee break and everyone will still be very stressed. We then did the do. And the do is not a passive process. It's actually observing and watching and seeing what happens. So on the Friday, a coffee break actually took place a bit later at 11:45, lasted 20 minutes. We used a different room to accommodate us all because there's quite a few of us. Everyone except the medical student asked for a tea or coffee, and we managed to collect the same data so that we could compare. And that's what we did on the Wednesday and the Friday. And this happened live. It wasn't planned. It wasn't done in a side room. And we took everyone away for an hour or two to go through this. And we looked at some of the numbers. And you can see that the ACPs, largely their stress levels went down. The doctor who attended also got better. The medical students remained in complete bliss. The consultant, that's myself, although thought this could be more stressful, actually wasn't so bad. And my stress levels went down. We interestingly finished earlier. Okay, so we were more productive, and the number of patients that we saw were similar. I was a bit more familiar with the patients, so that needs to be given into account. And the length of the coffee break was 20 minutes. So that coffee break with data suggests that we still finished on time and everyone was less stressed. So we study, and this is the really important. You don't just go and decide what you're going to do next. You need to study that data. And I've already mentioned some of the things that we picked up. The coffee break lasts a bit longer than 15 minutes. Coffee break may reduce stress levels for some staff. Consultants still stressed, but less so. And my medical students are in an optimized state of Zen at all times, irrespective of what goes on in life, which I probably need to look at some other time. Patients were also more familiar with the team on Friday. So once we got to that stage, we've done our plan, do, and our study. The final bit is to act. We have data to act on. We've studied it. What do we do? And there's the 3 big A's. The adopt, basically, you love everything that's happened and you're going to adopt the coffee break with no further changes. You might adapt. You may go for a longer coffee break or decide a different brand of coffee by going down to Costa, or abandon and you decide the whole thing's useless in terms of trying to reduce stress levels on the ward round. Or you potentially could do something else in this case and repeat and collect more data on different days. Now, I think for time reasons, I'm not going to go through the Menti, but what I'd like you to do is out of those 4, if you're in the chat, if you could just put down whether you do 1, 2, 3, and 4 in the chat, if you can, out of those 4 options, if you were going to do something regarding the next session of the coffee. Okay, if you can do that on the chat. And I'm going to carry on and we can catch up with the messages later. So would you adopt it, adapt it, abandon, or repeat the measurements to get a bit more information?
Got to repeat.
Okay, fine. So I think what we will say here is that every single one of them is potentially valid. I would probably myself personally have gone for the adapt or the repeat, because actually you might want to try on a different day. You might want to try it at basically when there's more or less patients around and there's more or less juniors around, to make sure that that variation is understood. So probably repeating and probably adapt it, and maybe consider a shorter or a different type of coffee break. Okay, so 1 and 4. Yep, so everyone decided to do that. This is what the team actually did. They basically, after a few rounds of this PDSA, they all decided to go for a Costa, because they decided the coffee break was actually quite valuable, and they all had smiley faces at the end of it. So that was really an option of just to see how to do PDSA. And it doesn't have to be fancy Excel spreadsheets. It could be done on the back of my patient sheet here. That's how I collected the data. That's actually the data we collected. We've also shown that actually it's not just one cycle of intervention that you need to do. You may need to keep on repeating those cycles to get to your eventual aim, to what you want to achieve. And you may require multiple cycles. So don't get fixed on one idea that's going to fix it all. You may need to do further ideas or adapt the first idea to get to where you are. Remember, your idea is not what you're after. It's after to get your aim. If you focus on the aim, all ideas are valid and all learning is valid. Okay, so it's really important to say. So QI tip 10 is that's me as well. Okay, so how to sustain your QI. All right, should be discussed and planned early on, not the last thing you design. What does that actually mean? It means that essentially there's a whole bunch of things that you can do to make sure you sustain, by getting the right people involved, stakeholders, people who are there permanently, etc., that you've understood the problem properly, so that you've made the right interventions. And then after that, where you think you've reached a steady state because your measurements are showing that that's where you are, you may decide that actually you now want to be in a position of sustaining. Now, sustaining is tricky, especially if you're leading the improvement work and you're going to go off to another place, to another trust, to another department, to another hospital even. And there are a number of things that you can do to make sure that there's more chance of sustaining. You could embed system changes, so you could change the IT system, you could add a new pro forma, so these things are part of the system. You could make sure that your improvements are part of the future staff induction for new staff. You could audit the data to make sure that you continued your sustainment over a period of time. I usually do that at 30, 60, or 90 days. You can hand over your handover project. Remember that bus we talked about? So someone else now hops onto the bus, but you've handed over, so they carry on your improvement work after you've left. You could then potentially scale and improve to other departments as well. So it becomes an entire culture change. So it's not just your department that does it. And you could also then share and celebrate to a wider audience to make sure you embed that as well. These are just some of the things you can do. There's plenty more, which we can go through in the main workshop. So, Tom, you got a bonus tip, which wasn't in the top 10. And 11's a dodgy number, so you called it bonus tips, which is fun.
Yeah. We do a lot of odd numbers. So the final one really is just kind of to summarize this. You might have seen kind of, as we explained what our UDIS is, a bit of a rough framework. We've sort of the tips follow a bit of an order from the idea of picking a project all the way through to sustaining at the end. The last one really is kind of about what quality improvement is, and one thing that we just want to put out there from your perspective is that it is a lifelong journey. Like, we are still learning. There's still so much more you can learn in terms of the different types of methodologies you can use and different environments that you can be in. That's something which almost you have to make peace with. There's always new things which are coming up, and staying abreast of all those improvement approaches is a real key part of this, and also coaching people as you go through this more than anything. Just on to the next slide. There's a really there's a really seminal piece of work called Habits of an Improver, and what I'd urge you from the end of this is have a look at it and have a look at how many of those habits that you have at this moment, but also what could you go about doing in the future in terms of improving your self-awareness, in terms of improvement. What we want to try and get to is a place where we're not just focusing on projects, we're talking about continuous improvement. So actually on a day-to-day basis, we're identifying problems and you're engaging people and empowering them to make changes themselves. We want to create that culture of improvements, which is a project is a good place to start, but actually as we progress past those quality improvement programs and developing that culture of improvement, depending on where you are in the world in terms of healthcare. One thing I'd urge you guys to do from today is that we're giving you 11 tips, as it were, really 10 tips and a bonus round, but I think take one and try it out from your perspective on things that you, as we spoke about a lot, being part of a team, that might be your starting place, but also might be capturing data. There's a lot of tips on there, but actually don't be overwhelmed. Take one of the tips and just test it out and move from there. So we've given you a number of, I suppose, lessons that we've learned over the years. There's probably another 100 more we could share with you, but that's probably the really high level stuff from that perspective. So I believe that we have managed to achieve our aim, which was to do all this in under 60 minutes. So, and we had Andy at the start as well, who was giving a spiel, so definitely under 60 minutes. So just from that perspective, I know there's a few questions, but Andy, should we close there?
That was perfectly timed, guys. It's like you do this for a living, honestly. That was
How about
that? To the second, in fact, 15 seconds. So yes, yeah, I think there's one question that's coming from Rebecca. I've not looked at the chat because I've got that many windows open. I can't see them all.
There was one question about where we got the 5 steps from. So it's a joint document from the Royal College of Physicians and the Institute of Engineering. If you just type in RCP Institute of Engineering 5 steps on Google, you will see that document come up. And so it's based on that. There are many different ways of, how you might want to frame an improvement project and program of work, but we find that captures most of those steps and all the tools and the methodologies you can sort of frame into those 5 sections. And the order, I think, is helpful to just have a mind map of where you think you are in your improvement process, and it's helpful for us.
There was another question as well from Alexandra, and I suppose the question was, what do you do when you can't agree? Are there a set of principles that make logic king? So there is, I think, this is probably a bit of a cop-out in terms of an answer sometimes, but actually we talked about PDSA, and sometimes if somebody is particularly problematic in your team, like let them try it. The whole idea of PDSA is that there's never one thing which is going to solve all this. It's always going to be multiple things to solve the problem. So let them try it out. If they fail, from that perspective, you're allowing them to fail fast and fail quick as well as part of a team. There's no told you so. There's no kind of, you're not allowed to do this again. This is part of that team building. And actually, if they're being difficult, let them try it out. I'm sure there'll be multiple of things that you could try out in the future, which will build upon or adapt what's actually happening. But, in terms of some of the tools we showed today as well, like developing a driver diagram just to see how those particular changes might support and move towards that overarching aim. But actually, a lot about quality improvement is kind of like people and behaviors and character and different personalities. So you will find people who want to argue till the blue in the face. So just give it a go. There's never no harm in it, especially when you start small and scale up from there.
Fabulous, guys. Thank you very much. I have just popped on screen your symposium that is on Saturday the 12th of November. And so if you have got an interesting QR, or someone in your teams or at work in your workplace who wants to come and join us for one of our Saturday morning symposiums, and then we have got the 2 guys back from 9 o'clock till 1 o'clock on Saturday the 12th of November. And to book onto that event, all you need to do is just go to cpdme.com, and then literally it's up here at the CPD events, and then you can reserve your ticket for that Saturday morning symposium. It's really, really simple, and it's just gone live literally now, because I was supposed to make it live this morning, but I've just made it magic now, which I've done. So you can literally grab your ticket for that, and if you want to download the schedule, then simply click on the download the schedule there. If you want to join us for some more up-and-coming webinars, then just click onto the cpdme.com, onto the webinars page, and as you can see, as you scroll down like you probably have done for tonight, we have got a few more CPD webinars that are free of charge and available for you to register tonight. So please do jump over to the website and take part in that. If you have got the app again, then please do easily click into the app, because using the app literally makes recording your CPD super simple. If you're not a member of CPD tonight, you can scan that QR code on screen there and you can purchase CPD certificate, but I would strongly advocate that you join CPD and you'll get all your CPD certificates for all of these live webinars included, and also access to over 500 previous webinars where you'll get them too. So all that leaves me to say is, guys, thank you so much for both of you for joining us tonight here at CPD.
Me too.
Thank you very much. Thanks all, guys.
Thank you so much indeed. As I said, you will be able to catch up on the recording on YouTube. You will also get an email tomorrow with all the bits and bats in there. And I will also send you a discount code for the symposium in November. So if you are at work, please stay safe, keep doing an amazing job. And thank you so much for what you do. If you are at home, kick off your slippers, enjoy the rest of your evening. And thank you for supporting CPD. Take care, everybody, and good night. Thank you.
Thank you.
See you later. Bye-bye. Bye.